What is MDUFA V? It's an acronym. The FDA is famous for acronyms. As one person pointed out to me, only a very strange organization actually has an acronym for acronyms, TLA, three-letter acronym. MDUFA V is no different. It's another acronym, Medical Device User Fee and Modernization Act, or Medical Device User Fee Amendment. There are a couple different versions of it depending on which acronym we're talking about and which decade we're talking about, because this has been in place now for 20 years. In 2022, the first MDUFA Act was put in place to help fund the FDA. They spend a large amount of their resources reviewing 510K submissions and drug submissions, so the devices and the drugs that the FDA regulates. Specifically, when you submit a 510K, you pay a user fee. For a 510K, it was approximately around $12,000 for a standard fee, and around $3,000 for the small business discounted fee. If you were submitting drugs, it would be a different part of the FDA and different fees, but a large portion of that money, if not all of it, goes to the division of the FDA that's actually reviewing your submission, depending on what type of submission we're talking about. They also have fees for registering your company. The annual registration fee that you pay is to cover the US FDA inspections that are conducted by the Office of Regulatory Affairs, or ORA. So every single division of the FDA that's involved in the regulations, some of that funding comes from user fees, if not all of it coming from user fees in some way. So why is it so important to know more about these MDUFA acts? Well, every 5 years, it gets renegotiated between industry and the FDA. And when that happens, there's politics that come into play, because there are senators and representatives that want to have a bill that favors their constituents to be approved along with this necessary funding. Without this necessary reauthorization of user fees, the FDA wouldn't function. It just wouldn't have enough resources in order to make it happen. So a large portion of their funding comes from industry. But if you want to get a bill passed for something else, tack it on to something that's necessary, and it will get pushed through with yours on its back. So this is how our partisan government works. And I don't think it's all that different from some other governments, but that is how politics works. You want to get one bill approved, attach it to another bill, and one will help the other one through. Well, this happens every 5 years because it's a 5-year authorization or reauthorization. So the date came up to expire October 1st of 2022. So if you don't have funding in place for the FDA, you have to notify the employees, oh, we're going to furlough you in 60 days. And to the commissioner's credit, he did everything that I could see was possible to communicate, we believe we're going to have funding. We believe we're not going to furlough any employees. We believe that Congress is going to come to an agreement. And I'm sure there was a lot of lobbying behind the scenes by the FDA as well as by industry to make sure this happens. There were different representatives and senators that stood up and said, this is crucial legislation that must be pushed through. But it's really hard to tell for somebody that isn't intimately involved in all the details of those bills to say, are they really behind that because they are just worried about the user fees, or are they also somewhat biased in the support of this bill because whatever legislation they're supporting for their constituents is also tied to that bill? And that's what makes it politics. And this happens every 5 years. So there's always the risk of furloughs. There's the risk of people not being able to get their products cleared by the FDA and not be approved by the FDA if it's a drug or a high-risk medical device. the FDA may lose employees and may fall behind even more than they already are. And there's no way to prevent that unless you have a way of changing our entire government system so that that's not part of politics. And that's very unlikely to happen anytime soon. So to give you an idea of the situation, what kind of impact this is, the FDA may have a few thousand people that are involved in the process of approving medical devices in the Office of Device Evaluations. And their goal was to hire 1,400 new employees with this new funding that was coming through. That's a huge number of employees that we're trying to increase it by. Why can't they hire all the people that they need? Well, if you knew that you were going to be hired by the FDA and might get furloughed in the next 5 years, you might not be too anxious about taking that job. You might take a better paying job in industry because a lot of times industry does pay better. So that's the situation behind this. We're trying to get basic funding for the FDA to operate the device and drug divisions of the FDA. We're trying to do it through industry funding sources, which is every single time they do a submission, we charge industry, and that pays for our employees to do their jobs. And it also enables us to hire new people so we can expand and improve the existing programs. But at the same time, industry doesn't want to have the user fees go up by too much, or it becomes very difficult for small businesses to be innovative and come up with new products. So that's part of the reason why we have small business discounts. But when you look at the way the funding was done, you will see that it wasn't even across the board. There was a very large increase in the amount of fees that were paid for 510Ks. Across the board, it was approximately 17.78, 17.79%. And for medical devices, it was over 50%, specifically 510Ks. 513Gs was a smaller increase, de novos was a smaller increase, but 510Ks was a very large increase. So I'm not saying whether that wasn't necessary or not. I know that if you look at European CE marking, that's astronomically higher than what the FDA charges. And based on the amount of time it takes us to prepare these new submissions in these new formats, I would say that the time investment that they are saying they need is probably warranted. So you may not be happy with the amount, but it's probably reasonable given the amount of number of pages that a 510K has increased over the years. I remember when I started, we were looking at submissions of hundreds of pages, maybe 300, 400, 500 page submissions. Now we're looking at 1,500 pages and up, as many as 6,000 pages for a submission. And everything has software now, so that's a lot of documentation, and cybersecurity will be the next thing that will expand that number of pages even further. So this is where your taxpayer dollars go. This is where your industry dollars go. It's to fund the FDA for positions, and you want to have that funding so we have employees there that are competent instead of whoever will take the lowest paying job and doesn't mind being furloughed every 5 years. So that's what MDUFA 5 is all about. If you want to know more information about the user fee increases and what those actual user fees were, check down below. If you're reading our blog page, you're reading the embedded video on the top or watching the embedded video on the top, and down below we have another embedded video that I recorded live last Friday during our live streaming session on YouTube. If you're looking on our YouTube channel, just look for the live streamings from last Friday. Last Friday was October 7th. So that's the live streaming, and it'll have user fee in the keywords. So you shouldn't have too much trouble finding it. I hope that's helpful explaining what that MDUFA 5 is all about. And if you have any other further questions, please don't forget to put a comment down below or to email me. And if you have any suggestions for future topics, please let me know. And if you know somebody that might be interested in understanding these regulations and why MDUFA 5 is what it is, please share the video with them. Have a great day and have a good weekend. Bye-bye.